Live from the heart of America, I'm Steve. We're ready to fight for you from the foxhole of freedom, giving you better analysis and insight than anyone else. Shining a spotlight into the darkness of the political media industrial complex, and it's quite a swamp. Delivering the relentless pursuit of truth for you. Here are 3 main things you need to know to start your day today. Number 1, the doom and gloom crowd is having quite a summer so far. Wildfires, smoke, and some drought has all the climate Nazis running wild with their hair on fire, which, by the way, adds to the problem. Number 2, Tucker Carlson debuted on Twitter, collecting millions of views. In fact, he out-delivered every newscast on cable and on network, and then CNN dumped its CEO, plus lawsuits are flying. And number 3, the war on you. That's where we start today, the war on you. We're starting there today. I mean, we talk about all kinds of wars, this war and that war. I mean, the government always has some kind of war it wants to talk about, but the biggest one of all they don't want to discuss or even recognize, that they want you to stare blankly into your phone, drool at the TV while binge watching some movie about Pride Month, and keep your mouth shut. Silence, peasant. The mindless bobbleheads on MSNBC and CNN chortle at the hopeless little conservatives always worried about their silly rights and freedoms being attacked, when they assure us the government's doing everything it can to help us. They chortle like the sheep they are being led to slaughter. They just don't seem to understand. When the war is being waged on center-right America runs out of targets, they will be in the crosshairs. I mean, there was a war on drugs, remember that? That went really well. Just ask the folks in Portland and Denver and Chicago. I think it's pretty safe to say the Sinaloa cartel and all the others have been cashing in nicely on that fiasco. The war on poverty began all the way back in 1965, another glowing example of the fine work done by the progressives in improving America in the nearly 60 years since. I mean, have you seen the tent cities filled with the homeless people spread all over San Francisco and Los Angeles? Oh, and by the way, the war on poverty has cost American taxpayers just over $30 trillion. Seems to line up quite nicely with our national debt. The war on the sexes appeared to have been won by those leading the women's rights movement, but lately women are on the losing end of that entire conversation, and men dressed up as women now have all the spoils from that battle. But at some point, the Democrats, the progressives, the New World liberals decided America was the enemy. And anyone who loves this country is an enemy combatant. And they began to dig in for the long years of trench warfare. They prepared the battle plans, executed well-timed attacks, and began to make progress in their anti-America agenda. The wars are now being fought on many fronts, and those being targeted include parents looking out for the well-being and mental health of their children. Schools themselves have ended up on the front lines of the culture wars, where left-wing extremists demand the lessons include only the radical ideas they support. Police have been asked to protect us, our communities, and our families, and are now the ones being treated like criminals. The war on the police began a few years ago, and despite lip service to the contrary, it has not let up. Christians and Jews have found themselves on the receiving end of numerous attacks by the self-righteous lefties who declare them and their churches to be purveyors of hate for actually having standards and moral guidelines that they adhere to. War is also being waged on free speech, gun rights, and even Christmas, for God's sake. And for far too long, we've allowed it to go on. The left keeps attacking, sensing weakness, because that is what they've found, weakness, and a reluctance of many people to become confrontational. That comes from the war on men and boys, by the way, and the traditional nuclear family. Those wars began about the time I was born, when giving single moms bigger government checks became the fashionable thing to do and forcing dads out of the house. And of course, the war on masculinity was married to the twisted idea that somehow families were better off with all that toxic masculinity and testosterone thrown out. Today, there's a war on your money, too. What better way to bring millions to heel, like Hillary Clinton would say, than destroy the value of your money? Ask the Biden administration about the skyrocketing cost of everything, and they give you a list. And there's one thing that they're not short of. What is that? Excuses. Listen.
As you know, grocery prices rose because of the global supply chain bottleneck and unforeseen supply shocks like avian flu and war in Ukraine, and also poor weather.
Let's see. Bird flu, the war in Ukraine, and weather. Not terrible policies in Washington. No, it's bird flu and weather and probably you. And while you're finding it harder and harder to buy groceries and pay the electric bill, the global elites, they don't care. They don't have those problems. That's for little people. After all, you may have noticed there is a war on energy of all kinds today, too. The fossil fuel is evil. So is nuclear power. I guess they'd want us to use cow pies like the good old days to burn and to cook, but there's also a war on farming and cows, too. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that cows, well, they fart too much. And if you have the nerve to eat meat, you must be some kind of a heartless baby killer, a barbarian. I mean, what kind of dark-hearted person would kill an animal and eat it when it's cruel and its carbon footprint might kill another endangered snail darter somewhere? What the hell's wrong with you? There's a war on American sovereignty as the borders have been thrown wide open with no end in sight and no place for millions of foreigners to live or eat or work. Not that it matters. I mean, California's setting them up with unemployment checks. Soon, trust me, soon other states will follow because moving illegals away from the border after the Biden administration continues to leave it open is the plan, apparently. Listen.
I've said it many times from here, repeatedly from this podium, that busing or flying migrants around the country without any coordination with the federal government, we've talked about this, state or local officials as well, is dangerous and unacceptable. And we'll continue to be very, very clear about that. It is dangerous and unacceptable because you're putting people's lives at risk, and it's dangerous and unacceptable because you're actually putting a lot of pressure on these states and local areas. And so
clearly there's a war on your intelligence as well. Apparently, flying and busing illegals all over the country, privately or at the direction of governors of the different states, is dangerous. It's white supremacy, I'm sure it is. But flying them all over the country in federal planes or shipping them all over the country in federal buses, well, that's perfectly safe and perfectly acceptable. You understand, peasant. In New York City, the mayor there, Eric Adams, is struggling to figure out how to look after just 75,000 illegals in his city, a tiny amount of the millions that have flooded in just the last 2 years. But he is struggling. Listen.
We're disciplined and we're executing on it. It is my vision to take the next step to this, to go to the faith-based locales, and then move to private residents. There are residents who are suffering right now because of economic challenges. They have spare rooms, they have locales, and if we can find a way to get over the 30-day rule and other rules that government has in its place, we can take that $4.2 billion, 4.3 even maybe now, that we potentially would have to spend, and we can put it back in the pockets of everyday New Yorkers, everyday houses of worship, instead of putting it in the pockets of corporations. And some of those corporations come from outside our city.
Private residents. Does the Third Amendment of the United States Constitution come to mind? You cannot force people to house soldiers. Can you force them and entice them to house people that are in the country illegally? What a strange, long, strange trip it's been. Just keep on trucking. We'll take a break because I'm just getting started. This is the Steve Gruber Show. Good to see you and good to hear you. Good to be here. I'll be right back.